Pushkin.
When S.G. Goodman released her debut album, Old Time Feeling, in 2020, critics hailed it as a stunning introduction to a bold new voice in Americana. Co-produced with Jim James of My Morning Jacket, the album showcased Goodman's ability to balance classic Southern sounds with progressive ideas, earning widespread acclaim and landing on numerous year-end best-of lists. S.G. was raised in Hickman, Kentucky, in a family of row crop farmers and storytellers. That upbringing shaped her worldview and her songwriting. She sings about small-town living with both deep affection and clear-eyed critique. Now with her third album, Planting by the Signs, Goodman continues to mine rich themes like love, loss, and reconciliation. The record is inspired in part by the ancient tradition of farming according to the cycles of the moon, a practice passed down through generations in her family. On today's episode, Bruce Headlam talks to S.G. Goodman about growing up in a family of storytellers and how that tradition makes its way into her songwriting. She also discusses co-producing her latest album and how she was able to make a bigger, more atmospheric sounding record. This is Broken Record. Real musicians, real conversations. Here's Bruce Headlam with S.G. Goodman.
Tell me about Planting by the Signs.
Well, Planting by the Signs, which is, the title of my album, is an ancient belief system. And in fact, a lot of people, I guess there's been a lot of different cultures that have looked to the moon and the stars for guidance. And Planting by the Signs, and I guess a simple way to put it is when people noticed that the moon affected water and everything that was made of water would probably be affected by the moon.
Was this an idea you grew up with? Your dad was a farmer.
Yeah, I kind of learned about this concept just over the kitchen table, old people in my community, and it wasn't necessarily something that they pointed out that we believed in. But for instance, I was weaned from my mother by the signs. My brother cuts his hair by the signs. I remember, my grandmother saying things like, the signs are in the head. If you pull a tooth right then, you're going to bleed more. These types of things.
Really?
But in current day, because, I guess my lineage of knowing this belief system would have came through like probably Celtic, Irish ancestors, German, whatever, passed through the Appalachian Mountains, settled in the South, and these are things that they still believed. But this was just kind of a common practice, and still people use this to this day to plant and to do certain things.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
What resonated for you when you were thinking of this album and the song?
Well, I have 5 little nieces and a nephew, pretty young, and I guess there's probably this moment for everybody when you realize that you are going to be the one who's now the storyteller of the family. I remember my aunts and uncles and older people in my community telling stories and kind of giving me a context of things. And yeah, that was just kind of a little bit of burden that I felt to do, to make sure that my art reflected something more substantial than me just writing like a heartbreak song. I mean, if people were looking back at music in this current moment, we could find a lot of heartbreak songs, but can we find songs that help us, hold on to our history and kind of point to how our belief systems have always changed over time? Maybe that would help somewhere down the road.
Are there songwriters who do that for you?
Well, I would say that there are archivists that have done that for me. I think of like Alan Lomax.
Mm-hmm.
And I think of how I've really enjoyed listening to old field recordings and people who've gone into different parts of the world and set up a little tape recorder and have captured something, especially when it comes to old traditional folk tunes and melodies and things. You can see we're connected across history. especially when it comes to musical traditions, for sure.
And that's also a sound, that field recording sound. That's something that finds its way into your albums. It finds its way into this album, I think.
Yeah, I guess a better way to put what made me want to write this album is I was really interested in how stories are passed down.
Mm-hmm.
And one thing that was important to me while making the album was to represent a lot of different ways stories are passed down. So that's one reason I included some field recordings in the actual album. That's the reason I included tattoos as my artwork that showcased, little images that show up in the album. Tattoos are a way that we actually put stories on our own bodies.
Mm-hmm. Were there great storytellers in your family?
Oh, absolutely.
Who were the great storytellers?
My favorite storytellers would be my Aunt Sally. And, I think Southerners sometimes, they have their little signature thing that they say. I would say that if people who are close to me, I tend to go, well, comma, and then go into it. Well, my Aunt Sally, her husband, my uncle, is named Walter. And the way she always starts a story is, well, I laughed and told Walter, whatever it is.
Oh.
And so she always says that, and that's, it's something I'll never forget. But it's really kind of the cadence and the flow of a story that I think is, one of the most special things about a Southern story, because they're going to be long, they're going to be winding, and it's an art form for sure. But yeah, I was raised with the best. I would say I was raised with the best storytellers.
Are you very conscious of that when you sit down to write? Are you thinking of telling stories in a certain way?
I feel like it's something that comes kind of natural to me. And also, I'm a little bit sometimes too aware of it and self-conscious of it. So, for instance, in this album, my song Snapping Turtle, it is a real stream of consciousness, but it is a story. And they do connect. But it is a very Southern story, because I go from talking about kids and a snapping turtle to all of a sudden, we're not hearing about a snapping turtle anymore for quite a while. And that's kind of a Southern story. And then at the very end, you wrap it together and it all makes sense. And you might have sat on somebody's porch for an hour and a half. But it's a whole cohesive story, but it might take you a minute to get there. So I did find myself really leaning into Southern storytelling in this album on several songs.
These are character-driven stories often.
Mm-hmm.
And the character in Snapping Turtle is, well, there's the narrator,
Mm-hmm.
and there's Leanne.
Mm-hmm.
So when you were writing that, were you writing the Leanne part and then the Snapping Turtle, which is almost an image that starts it?
Yeah.
How do you put those things together in your mind?
Well, actually, the line, I guess, that started the song Snapping Turtle was something that I actually heard when I was maybe 12 or 13, where a girl that I grew up with actually came to school after we were back from summer to tell us, our friend group, that she had spent the whole summer in Paris, which was Paris, Tennessee. And it was just like a little Paris. It had an Eiffel Tower and everything.
Mm-hmm.
But I remember being in college several years later. I was in a little short story writing class, and that image came up to me, and I thought it was an interesting way to think about worldview, maybe economic status, opportunity, fate, all these things, just in the fact that what's really sad is that my friend back in grade school, to this day, I know really doesn't know the difference of Paris, France, and Paris, Tennessee. And it's not coming from a judgmental place.
Mm-hmm.
It's just saying something really true about where I come from and about how I have been trying to process how different people are growing up right beside you and have been handed very different hands than others. So that line started that many years ago and reappeared here in this song. And the snapping turtle line, that was also a lived experience from childhood.
When does that snapping turtle, when does that happen? What's the realization that you can put those together?
I think really the moment when I realized that the snapping turtle was Leanne was when I realized the protagonist, or, the narrator's, I guess, purpose in that song, which was that they were playing God. When I raised my hand, I brought down the wrath of God himself, I'm really, really intrigued with, religion, free will, but mostly predestination. If I was honest with myself, I wasn't a philosophy major because I was going to take the LSATs and be a lawyer. I think I was obsessed with the question of predestination, and I took every course I could to understand more about this because it was a really important question for me in the context of how I was raised. I was raised Southern Baptist. I wasn't raised a Calvinist necessarily, but I was intrigued by it. I've always been really weird into doctrine and things like that. So the idea that an all-knowing God would know someone's fate and is said to be the creator, that has to bother you when you see things that don't seem fair.
There is a line in that song, small towns where my mind gets stuck. You grew up in a small town. You very much identify still with that town. Tell me about that line in the context of your growing up.
Especially around how I moved from talking about the snapping turtle to going into Leanne. The way this song kind of unfolded for me really started when I started therapy. A line that didn't make it in this song was, "Don't look at me when I'm crying." I had this chorus, an actual chorus that was in this song, and I scrapped it. But when I first started therapy, I wasn't raised in an emotional family, we didn't cry. I've gotten a little bit better at crying publicly in the last maybe 4 years of my life, but I remember being in this therapy session and she had me do this thing, EFT, this tapping stuff, and I just started crying, and I was so unbelievably embarrassed. And of course, because instead of allowing myself to be vulnerable, I just got angry, and I was yelling at this therapist and saying, don't look at me right now. Why are you staring at me when I'm doing this? And that led me kind of to write this entire song, because I look at this song as a looking back and processing the past and context of my life.
Growing up, was the church your first exposure to music?
Definitely. Yeah, I would say the church was where I went to 3 concerts a week. But there was also, even though not everyone in my family was musical, I think it was a very commonplace that every house had a piano, and someone in the family could play. And I do remember, my Aunt Sally could play, my brothers could play different ones. And I remember as I was a really small child, when my dad and his brothers still farmed together, they had a fish fry at our family farm shop and had a string band there. And I was 3, 4 years old at that time. So I've been around it, but church is probably the biggest musical influence.
Now, when you say there were concerts at church, were these secular music concerts, or were these always...
Oh, no. I just make a joke, because I get asked a lot of time, what was your first concert? And I said, well, I went to 3 a week.
Yeah. Okay.
Oh, no, there was never secular music. There wasn't even, you weren't allowed to have... I didn't grow up in a church where you had a drum set, or there was nothing like that. They believed that anything past maybe an organ, you might have been carried away by the energy. you know, and we wanted to stay focused.
Okay. When were you first carried away by the energy? What music did you hear that made you think this is something I want to do?
My dad was a big music lover. He still is. And being in such a rural area, we spent a lot of time in the truck and tractor cabs and all that. He loves Supertramp, you know, that song, Take the Long Way Home.
Sure.
Okay, the harmonica. I just remember my dad just cranking that up in his old Chevy. So I guess what people, or what I thought of as like classic rock, my dad was really into that. And I had a neighbor who was really into old country. One of our landowners' wives that we took care of as she aged. But she would get on her piano and play old Hank Williams and Lefty Frizzell and different songs like that for me. And that's how I was introduced to old country.
And did you like it?
Oh, I loved it. And I remember finding Miss Betty was this lady's name. And my job, since I think I was probably about 10 years old, I started cleaning her house. And she lived right across the street from my parents. Miss Betty couldn't sing, God bless her. But when she'd sit down at that piano and start singing, you know, I was walking after midnight. It was nice. I loved the song, but Miss Betty couldn't sing. So when I found a little CD of some old country classics at Walmart, I could not wait to take my little CD player over there for Miss Betty, and she enjoyed it, and I enjoyed our time a lot better too, you know?
We'll be back with more from S.G. Goodman after the break.
There are some Kentucky writers that write character songs. I thought of them when I was listening to your album, like Tom T. Hall.
Oh, yeah.
And Keith Whitley, who's and a little Loretta Lynn, I have to say.
Oh, yeah.
She's got strong characters in her song. It's usually the narrator.
Yeah.
Were they influences on you?
I mean, of course, I would imagine
Right.
that I deeply appreciate what they do.
Yeah.
I think when it comes to character development, I have to give tribute to my writing mentor. His name's Delray Phillips. He was a short story writer, Pulitzer Prize nominee, actually. And I was lucky enough to study under him in college, and then we've remained very good friends. You know, he's the one who taught me to really respect your characters. In fact, I remember he was a big smoker up until recently, actually. Our college room was on the first floor of this building, and he'd go outside and teach us through the window while he'd chain smoke, okay? And I remember him yelling through the window one day that we were not good enough writers to kill our characters, and that he better not have any papers turned in where somebody killed off somebody. He said, you got to earn that.
Wow.
And he also said something to me that made me think about characters differently. He said, when you die, like, nobody's going to remember your name, but they might remember your characters. And that's how people actually live on.
Tell me about the song Michael Told Me.
It's a special song for me. I lost a kind of a father figure. I called him Murray Dad Mike, and he was super special to me. And this song actually kind of revolves around his death, but who I'm speaking to in this song is not Mike. It's actually a close friend of mine, bandmate, actually co-produced this record, someone who I've collaborated with for, 13, 14 years now. But at the time that Mike passed away, we were about on our second year of not speaking with each other. We weren't on speaking terms. We had a little falling out. And it wasn't our first falling out. We've gone a year without speaking prior to that. So maybe in another 5 years we'll, something might happen. We'll do that. But it's because he's a chosen brother. Sometimes siblings fight, and we were just in our moment in that time. But when Mike passed away, we reached out to each other. And I think sometimes death gives you a good reason to put your bullshit aside and say, I love you and I'm glad we're here together. And now look what's happened. This song is on the record. Matt was kind enough and wanted to collaborate with me again. And I believe in his gift so much, I asked him to be a co-producer, and it's been a really great way to reconcile, and now we have this to show for it too.
That's wonderful.
Yeah.
Now, I think when you're young, everybody thinks, gee, why'd the Beatles break up so soon? And then anytime you're in a creative endeavor with other people, you're like, how did they last so long?
Yeah. Well, I think there's something special. You know, a friend told me once, she was like, sometimes the only thing a person can imagine is having been wronged. Sometimes when you don't have the experience of reconciling with people, you can't imagine what's on the other side. Like it's safer to remain in hard feelings than it is to be vulnerable and imagine what it could be if you reconciled. Because sometimes you can't imagine what that would look like. That was a part of this album, for sure.
Now, you write with him as well, is that?
Yeah, we've written a few things. He ended up, we were fighting, not in a bad way, but, you know, we fight all the time. We're both really passionate people, but I had a song on the album, Satellite. He was making suggestions for the chord progression in that song, and I'm pretty hard-headed, but Matt was right. So he helped me with the music on that one.
Okay. What's your typical writing process? How do you write?
I wish I knew. I really do. You know, a few of the songs we've already talked about, they've come together over years. And what I've found works best for me is to always be willing to just keep notes, to not overthink. You know, I don't feel like you have to have a song written every day to be a songwriter. I don't write like that. Do I write every day? I would say I do. But what I consider writing every day might be just humming a little melody into a recorder or my phone, or writing down a word that I think is interesting. And I think that allows me to always be in a creative state, but as far as having a fully finished product, I don't write like that.
Does there come a point where you've got a collection of images, things you want to put together, and you do have to sit down and work it out?
Well, like for instance, with this album, when I knew that I wanted to write about planting by the signs, and I knew that my goal was, I didn't want to write a college dissertation. I wanted to write songs that, if picked apart and looked at individually, could stand alone by themselves. But I knew that I really wanted to try to write a cohesive song that would lead back to planting by the signs. So the way I dealt with that was, I read everything I could get my hands on. I watched everything I could get my hands on. I talked everywhere I was. I was even with Jason Isbell in Europe late last fall. I was in Scotland, and I asked the coffee guy, I was like, you happen to know anybody who's into moon planting or planting by the signs around here? And he did. Isn't that cool?
Wow.
So I went to this little nursery and asked around. I knew even if I couldn't recall, you know, every single sign of the zodiac or whatever, if I read enough and just entrenched myself in it, that it would come out in my writing. And it did, you know, it did. And it was in a natural way. When it came time to actually write it, the details were there.
You do have a song called Fire Sign, which seems to be the most explicit reference to that kind of thinking. How, for example, does it appear in Solitaire, which is probably my favorite song on the album?
Oh, well, thank you. Well, have you ever noticed how a deck of cards has 4 suits, right? There's 4 seasons. How many weeks are in a year? It's how many cards are in a deck. It's set up actually to mimic a calendar and your experience passing through a year. In order to live by the belief of planting by the signs, you have to be aware and be able to tell what could possibly happen in the future by looking at the past. And so for me, that song is about seasons. that have passed. You know, that's the way I would make sense of it.
And there's a beautiful line. It's about betting against yourself. And I don't remember the precise line. What is it?
Yeah, it's Lord, you're gonna lose if you bet against yourself, because the song starts out, solitaire's the only game where you don't need nobody's help. But Lord, you're gonna lose if you bet against yourself.
Right.
Because the chorus, you know, back to actually Miss Betty and Hank Sr. Teaching me about, you know, some of the greats. He has the song Lost on the River. And being that I was learned how to, you know, ski on the Mississippi River, I thought when Hank was talking about being lost on the river that he was talking about a physical river. Well, no. Years later, when I learned how to play poker, which I'm terrible at, you know, I was a second one standing my first game, but apparently that's beginner's luck. But we were playing Texas Hold'em, and Hank Sr. was talking about the river in Texas Hold'em. So I went from talking about solitaire to where, yes, you're playing by yourself, where the river I'm speaking of in my song Solitaire is also, it's Hank's river. It's the river in Texas Hold'em where you can lose it all.
So much of that song seems informed by church.
Yeah.
It's I think as close as you get to a hymn on the album.
Yeah, I could see that for sure.
Were you conscious of that when you were writing?
I think this is another example of how, you know, how I just said that the images and details of Planting by the Signs would come if I just immersed myself in the material enough to where I didn't have to think about it.
Yeah.
I think writing a melody like is that I did on Solitaire, it's just an example of how I've been immersed in that world, you know, from such a young age, where those old types of melodies, I'm never going to be able to separate myself from them. They've gone too deep, you know.
I mentioned there are biblical allusions throughout the more so than in your other records, I think. You know, I Saw the Devil, and this incredible last song. Talk about that song.
Heaven Song.
Heaven Song.
Well, you know, I think at the beginning of this we were talking about storytelling, and that is a song where I really just gave myself full liberty to talk as long as I wanted. It's almost 9 minutes long. And along with losing Murray Dad Mike, in fact, it was only 2 weeks before I lost Mike, I lost my dog of 13 years, Howard. And then I was on tour. And Mike was supposed to join us on tour in Austin. He's from Texas and wanted to go to that show, but his lodging fell through. He didn't make it. We were out in Southern California. Oddly, I ran into ice on the Laguna Mountains. Scared the shit out of me. I've never lived in a place where you had to chain your tires, and there I was in a, 12-passenger van with gear and my band, and we had nothing but mountains in front of us. You know, I had to go all the way up into Seattle and down Utah and Colorado by the end of the tour. So I called Mike and asked him if he had any experience with chains on the tires, and we talked a bit on the phone. This was after I played Austin and played L.A., and on the way to San Francisco from L.A. is when I got the call that Mike had passed. That was my first tour of the year.
And this was unexpected?
This was unexpected. He died in a tree accident.
Oh, okay.
And let me tell you, Mike was crazy, and he would have wanted to die. There was only one other way I can think he would have wanted to die, which was just get eaten by a shark. He liked to surf. This was nuts. He got crushed in a tree, okay? And Mike wouldn't mind me telling you this. In fact, it's pretty badass. He got crushed in a tree. And this is the most Mike thing ever, but his partner, Therese, was trying to make her way out to where he was to help load this wood he was cutting. And as Mike was dying, he answered his phone to tell his partner of 20 years that he was dying.
Wow.
Yeah. I mean, it's amazing. If you knew him, you would be like, well, isn't that Mike Harmon?
Yeah.
Of course he would. And, you can giggle at it now because it's just so him. That was the beginning of 2023. I had an insane touring year that year. I never got to stop. When I started writing Heaven Song, I was heading out on tour with Margot Price right after that. That was, I believe, late August at that point. That was the first time I got to catch a breath, really, that whole year. I hadn't been able to process Mike's death or my dog, and I finally had a moment by myself at home. So I took some little mushrooms that Mike had given me and had like a very mellow moment on my back porch. And I remember just writing down the words and singing the melody to Maybe If I See It, Then I'll Want It. Because, of course, when people close to you die, when a little creature who's been in your house for 13 years is no longer there, you're thinking about mortality, you're thinking about, life after death, all these things. And I really was, and I wanted to. I was hoping to do some processing around that when I was home. And I ended up writing this big old road trip where, I know I'm the protagonist in the song, where I end up being in a car with all these man-made concepts. The only thing really that was real was the dog, and we're on a road trip to heaven. I knew I wanted to end the song. It took a long time. It took about a full year from that moment before I got the line, but I knew at the end of the song, the chorus is, maybe if I see it, then I'll want it, and I'm talking about heaven, even though I'm trying to get there, but I'm still not sure if I'll even want to give it a go. But then at the end of the song, Sin, who has also been in the car with me this whole time, wouldn't let me go into heaven before I answered what I had learned from Sin specifically. And my reply was that maybe if I see it, then I'll want it, which is kind of what, if you were raised in kind of the Christian tradition, that's what sin does, right? It makes you lust after things.
Are you patient with yourself when there's something not working on a song? Will you try and force something in, or you'll let it sit?
No, and that's another thing I learned from my writing mentor. He would always say, like, a story will go about its business. And I look at songs the same way. There's songs that have taken years to write. And the way I believe it, I do write everything down, but I'm not scared to put a song away because I have this idea that if it comes back, then it's meant to, and if it doesn't, then it wasn't. I really am not precious about that. I don't think I've thrown away my best ideas or something like that. I think if they're meant to stick around, they will. And
you believe in predestination for songs.
Oh, yeah. Let's bring it back full circle here.
Yeah.
One last break, and we'll be back with S.G. Goodman.
Are you writing for other people as well?
I would love to. Let me tell you something. This is funny. I have a really bad tendency. What I'll do, I'll get a wild hair one night and write somebody and say, let's get together, let's write, I'm more of a phone call kind of person, or it doesn't stick in my brain. So what I've tried to do now is keep a list and then share it with my management to say, hey, I want you to know I wrote so-and-so, and they said they were willing to write with me, but I haven't followed up. And I have a feeling if, I go on a walk after I hang up this phone that it'll be another 2 weeks before I remember that I did that again. I love my manager and thank God that, they are willing to help me do that. But yeah, I love to co-write with people. I don't have a lot of time for it, but I wish I did.
Because I was listening to this record, I thought, well, who wouldn't want some of these songs on their record too? They just seem to work that so well.
Thank you. Let's name some people that we would want to cover these songs. What are you thinking, like Dolly Parton? Now let's will it into existence.
But I would I want you to make as much money as possible.
Oh.
I would have wanted...
Well, you have to follow me on Substack. No, I'm just kidding.
Yeah, I'm not going to do that.
$8 a month will go a long way.
I would have said, honestly, I would have said Marianne Faithfull, because I thought she covered songs so beautifully.
Covering songs is it's truly an art form. I can't do it. I'm not very good at it.
Really?
Yes. I was in the studio with a friend of mine, Kelsey Walden, who's a great artist. Man, she really has a knack for reworking someone else's songs.
Yeah.
I just have I go blank. I've been really fortunate in the covering song department. Tyler Childers covered one of my songs. And it really is a rare thing where you're like, you know what? You're a really good person, and I'd be happy for you to cover my song. I don't have to worry about Tyler doing something and me being scared to be associated with him. But, you never know about some of these others. I'm not trying to make assumptions, but I do read, so...
Yes, you do. Do you feel at all a part of that world? You root yourself in Western Kentucky, which is not Nashville. Do you feel a part of that kind of Nashville world?
I would say I'm about 2 hours out, because that's how far I am from Nashville. It's good. Nashville has been good to me, and I don't have things to say about it negatively in that regards, but it's not a bad thing to be from Kentucky and be a musician. I think Kentucky music stands on its own, and it has for a really long time, and it probably will continue to. So, yeah, I'm about 2 hours out of Nashville.
Everly Brothers, Ricky Skaggs,
Yep.
Bill Monroe.
Kentucky isn't even just like a country music hub. I mean, when I open my mouth, I'm country, But I love punk music. I love rap. I love all kinds of different music. And Kentucky has a really big history of, we have Bonnie Prince Billy. We have Slint, an old post-punk band. My Morning Jacket. State Champion was a big influence on me. This band out of Louisville. It's a great indie band, Wombo. There's lots of different types of really amazing music that has come out of Kentucky. And
well, Jim James from My Morning Jacket produced your first record. Did he discover you in a sense, or?
I think I was forced on him.
Okay.
Not really.
But it worked out?
It did. Well, I asked a mutual friend of mine. I got the nerves. I went and worked on some demos, and then 6 months later, I finally got the nerve to send them to a mutual friend of ours, this artist named Daniel Martin Moore. I was up in the mountains with him and Joan Shelley and a bunch of different writers for this compilation called the Pine Mountain Sessions. And I saw that Jim James was on it. And I was like, oh my goodness. Because I was a really big fan of My Morning Jacket. And I was like, wow, I guess I'm not crazy far removed from this person. And I knew Daniel was friends. And after I got those demos together, I sent Daniel an email in October of that year. And by December, my friend and now publicist actually told me, we haven't heard back from Jim. It's a good record. You should, if you don't hear back by Monday, you should move on and just cut the record and go on. Well, I was actually living in Nashville. I lived in Nashville for about 6 months and was working at a little taco shop there. It was right before my serving shift. I'd been there prepping since 7. I was having a Coke outside, and I got an email looping me in that Monday with Jim James.
Did you do your shift?
I did it a lot happier that day than all the other ones,
Everybody got a little extra
Yep,
filling
I was
that
like,
day.
I am not going to be here much longer. I'm going back to Kentucky. I had my house in Kentucky and lived there to help pay off my property taxes that year.
Now, that sound it does have that lo-fi sound, a lot of reverb on the guitar.
Yeah.
You still have some of that, but this album the sound feels different. Did you go in with different ideas for how you wanted the production to go?
I did. Not only did I want the production as far as the sound to feel different, I wanted to make it known that I was going to be a third wheel as the producer. I've always co-produced all my records. And, you know, I have a very particular vision. And you could verify that with anyone who's ever done anything with me. I had worked with Drew Vandenberg and I've worked with Matt Rowan before on other projects, but never where it was as blatant as, all right, we're going to be all co-captains on this, and I am going to be more open to your ideas and things like that. So that was different and vulnerable feeling. But as far as, yes, making a bigger sounding record than I had in the past, that I went into the studio knowing I wanted to do that, and I hired musicians specifically to help accomplish that for me.
Do you know enough about production to think there's things I can do here to make this feel bigger?
Oh, definitely. This is the first record where I ever let keys and kind of anything that wasn't easily packed into my van and could go across this country on a record. I always had a problem with that. I always have been really particular about wanting for my live performance to sound just like the record. A lot of people aren't like that. You know, and a lot of listeners don't want that. But for me, starting out in music and trying to cut my teeth, and pretty much anyone I would come in front of had never heard me before, I wanted my live show to sound exactly like the record, so I was representing what I had done. And having a keyboard player early on in my tour life, that just couldn't happen. I couldn't have fit everybody in the van, and I couldn't afford to pay an extra person either.
Yeah.
So this record, I knew that I wanted to add another sonic element that was not present on albums in the past, and I chose, you know, kind of auxiliary key stuff. And I love it. I have Ben Tanner, plays with Alabama Shakes, and was down in Muscle Shoals, lives down there, so right by the studio. And what a champ, really good. And I mean, I'm not gonna lie, I was really uncomfortable with some of the ambient things that were coming out at first, but we honed it in a way that I was comfortable. And Matt and Drew, my co-producers, would always say, you are steering the ship of what, and that's important. I have to have the music sound like something that I don't get up in front of people and feel like it's not me, you know? So that was fun. But Matt Pence was my drummer. And it was just like watching a person, like just an alien. His drumming is just, it was hard to play live with him because I just wanted to watch. It was really amazing. And yeah, I was really fortunate to get to work with a lot of really, really great musicians on this record that made things, we just locked in with each other in the live room, and we're out of there in 10 days.
Amazing. Well, it's a great record. And thank you so much for doing this. It's been just wonderful.
Thank you. Yeah, thanks for having me.
In the episode description, you'll find a link to our favorite SG Goodman tracks, as well as her latest album, Planting by the Signs. Be sure to check out youtube.com/Broken Record Podcast to see all of our video interviews. And be sure to follow us on Instagram at The Broken Record Pod. You can follow us on Twitter at Broken Record. Broken Record is produced and edited by Leah Rose with marketing help from Eric Sandler and Jordan McMillan. Our engineer is Ben Tolliday. Broken Record is a production of Pushkin Industries. And if you like this show, please remember to share, rate, and review us on your podcast app. Our theme music's by Kenny Beats. I'm Justin Richmond.